Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another fabulous episode of the Healthcare Trailblazers podcast. Excited to be sitting here today with Catherine Stuland. Catherine is the CEO of GeneDx, which is a publicly traded company, and their stock seems to be having a great month. So congratulations on that. And Catherine, tell me about you.
Thank you for letting us share the GeneDx story. So GeneDx was actually born at the NIH almost 25 years ago. But I joined the company 3 years ago in order to really put a growth strategy behind it. I knew GeneDx had the industry's best genetic testing products that can really take a broad look at the information that resides within each one of us and our genome and be able to accurately diagnose disease and then be able to connect people with the right treatment. So it's been a really, really incredible experience over the past 3.5 years, really driving a new era of healthcare using genetic testing. So thanks for letting us share.
Okay, so I've heard a little bit about this. I'd love to dig in a little bit more just on an elementary level. I know genomes are, like you're saying, it does seem to be the cusp of kind of hyper-personalized medicine, the ability to target at the individual level like never before in history. Take a giant step back and just talk about what that kind of technology is and why now.
Sure. So if you think back to the early days of the Human Genome Project, it was this massive quest that was funded in order to really sequence from start to finish the human genome in order to do exactly what we're doing today. We want to be able to take a look inside to see if there is an underlying genetic reason that there's a disease. Today, it takes 6 to 8 years on average to diagnose a child with a rare disease, with a genetic disease. And given all of the improvements that we've been able to make, we can actually diagnose disease within weeks, if not days, really taking that broad look at the entire genome and be able to deliver actionable information, which is hugely important in terms of trying to really prevent the progression of disease and be able to intervene, whether it is from a diet perspective, a clinical trial perspective, an FDA approval perspective, to be able to really put somebody on a healthier path as soon as possible. So the why now comes down to cheaper sequencing costs, thanks to companies like Illumina, and the technology that we've actually built to be able to interpret a genome's worth of information at scale and be able to do it at a cost that makes sure that everyone has access to it. So it's not just the technical ability to sequence. It's not just the technical ability to interpret, but it's also ensuring that no matter who you are in the United States, that we're able to ensure that you have access to this information.
Mm-hmm. So talking about genetic diseases in general in children, so are genetic diseases are just there because they're genetic, right? Can some of them lay dormant for a while and then kind of explode as later stage in life? Are they always there? They start kind of not so intrusive and then they get worse over time. What's the benefit and why is it so incredible to be able to catch these early, so to speak? And the reason why I'm asking that question is because it would seem obvious to me something like early stage diabetes or something that is preventable entirely and you can catch it and then you can prevent it from happening. But it would seem to me that if someone has a genetic disease, I mean, can you cure it? Can you manage it? What my ignorance?
Yes. Yeah, the answer is yes to all of that. So, okay. So for starters, just to think about how common these diseases actually are, 1 in 10 Americans has a rare disease. Half of them are children. So this is actually really common. And when you think about it, it's conditions like epilepsy, it's autism, it's other developmental and intellectual delay related conditions that together are really quite common. So there's about 7,000 of these conditions that together are called rare diseases. It's actually very similar in the oncology world. So cancer is actually a constellation of hundreds of different conditions that we today just call cancer. So as we think about the prevalence of this, it's actually a fairly broad problem. And it's something that we can indeed diagnose at birth. So we're starting to do some work sequencing healthy newborns. And what we found is that here in New York State, we're doing a study called the Guardian Study. It is screening for about 450 clinically actionable conditions, and we're finding that about 3 to 4% of newborns who otherwise have no symptoms actually have a genetic condition. And so being able to intervene before a symptom starts to actually show up and starts to present and as a damaging path forward for the health of the child is ultimately where we want to get to. How do you use this information as proactively as possible to be able to really intervene? So that's where we want to be able to drive to, is anyone, regardless of where they live, being able to intervene early using this information. Now, the way that it plays out today is different. So we're waiting for a child to present with a symptom. So we're waiting for the child to have seizures. And the parents and the providers usually go through this trial and error period where they're showing up at the pediatrician, they're running a bunch of tests, they may run some scans, they most likely are referring out, usually after about a year and a half, to a specialist. And this process of trial and error goes on for, as I said, 6 to 8 years from the first symptom. And so really being able to intervene earlier means that you're able to do our best to prevent the progression of disease. There are FDA approved therapies that can do just that. We're seeing a ton of investment going into rare disease, drug development. We're seeing a ton of investment going into gene therapies. And so we've been able to see the full spectrum of a child diagnosed using our testing with hearing loss, being able to go into an experimental clinical trial for a gene therapy and be able to hear for the first time. So your question about, like, how far can we take it? Can we cure disease? I think this is where the ecosystem that we are privileged to be able to play a role in, between diagnostics and drug development. It really means just a really bright vision for what is possible in terms of diagnosis and hopefully curing more diseases moving forward.
Yeah, that's wild. But you guys are doing the testing, and then other people are doing the fixing.
Exactly.
Give me an example of a clinical non-actionable item.
So this is a huge debate in the genetics world. There are studies out there where they're looking at, for instance, risk of breast cancer for a newborn, and that's an interesting ethical debate, because if you're a new parent and you have a happy, healthy baby, and we're now telling you that there is a risk of future breast and ovarian cancer, how clinically actionable is that? There's not going to be anything that you're doing at that point in time. What's interesting, though, and that there's a study that Robert Greene is doing that actually helps inform for the parent that they may need to do something that's clinically actionable. So, Robert Greene out of Harvard, yeah.
Not the 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene.
Different one. Different one. Okay. Yeah, different Robert Greene. But all to say, there's a lot of really good, meaningful conversations that are happening right now about what actionability means. And to give you an example of when we think about some of these complex disorders where there's no FDA approved therapy, there may not be anything in clinical trials, but I met a mom whose son was born and was having 70 seizures a day. And there was no hope. And the doctors that she was working with said, unfortunately, there's not going to be a treatment in your son's lifetime. And she was a high school teacher. And today you would think that she had a PhD in genetics. She actually took this on as her mission, not necessarily for the sake of her son, but for a future family, and identified a compound, an investigational compound, through a researcher in Australia, and brought that to different biotech companies and got one to actually license it. So when we talk about actionability, there's it's in clinical trials. It's in clinical trials. So more to come. And I think the notion of what is actionable, when you talk to a parent who says, yes, it's devastating. Yes, there's nothing that is out there that is going to it can necessarily help my child today. But yes, connecting with other families and learning how they're managing through it. There's a higher rate of depression and anxiety, not just for these kids, but for the parents. There's a higher rate of divorce. So this is a devastating health crisis that is happening, where knowing the underlying condition and just knowing definitively whether or not there's a genetic condition actually can alleviate a lot of the suffering that is happening for these families, and helps connect them with others who are going through a really similar struggle as well.
Yeah, that's incredible. The reason why I brought up the question about non-clinically actionable is because I'd have to presume, and could definitely be wrong here, but I have to presume that that's actually the really difficult part, is figuring out how to parse. Because when you just give a fire hose of information at someone, none of it is actionable. It's all completely inactionable because it's just too much, And to be able to say, these are the things that you should focus on. These are the things that you should test. These are the things that you should maybe look at now. Can you give it over can you create a timeline? So hey, these are the things that you should focus on for your newborn now. Maybe when they're 10, you should look at X. When they're 20, you should look at, can you do that?
That's a fantastic way of thinking about it. So yeah, as we think about the future, the work that we're doing with this Guardian study, which it's entirely being pioneered by a doctor named Wendy Chung, who was at Columbia. She's now at Boston Children's. She has put so much thought into how to do this in an ethical and responsible way. I think part of what's really interesting, so the way that she communicates about it with parents is really effective. So 75% of parents are saying yes, they want to enroll in the study. But then I think a key to this is being able to say, we've taken a careful look at which conditions we should be screening for. And she has identified to date, we started with 200, we're now at 450 conditions. Mm-hmm. And that's in part informed by drug developers who are saying, hey, can you look at this panel? Or I'll give you an example, Alport syndrome, which is, it's called Alport syndrome. Mm-hmm. That is a genetic disease that could be diagnosed at birth. And the foundation that supports a lot of these families had a conversation with us and said, can you add this to the panel? And we were able to add it. So I think there's really good partnership in terms of Wendy bringing together this ecosystem of patient advocacy organizations, of drug developers, and her own construct of how do we make sure that we do this in a really responsible way. But I think the next version is exactly what you said. At what age do you shift into a different sort of cohort and different conditions? When I think about our future, I don't want us just diagnosing at birth. I want us being able to diagnose at any age. If there is a grandfather, my father had Alzheimer's disease. As you start to see as you're starting to see symptoms, no matter what age, being able to ensure that we can tap into that genetic information that's residing within each one of us and be able to ultimately get to a place where not only are we diagnosing the disease, but hopefully we're going to have some good treatments for Alzheimer's sometime in the future. I think it's the time is way overdue for a breakthrough there. So it's really intervening at any stage in life.
But, oh, I didn't realize that. So this is a limitation. You're not choosing to focus on newborns. You can only test newborns.
No, for our model today, we're focused on the pediatric segment. So we're diagnosing kids who are symptomatic. The newborn screening program that is a research study.
Oh, got it.
That the protocol for that is all healthy newborns.
Got it. How many kids and who do you sell to? You sell to, like, who's the customer? It's not direct to the patient, right? It's not like a kit that I get Instagram ads on, right?
Correct. So a provider is involved with every single order. We think it's really important when you're dealing with medically actionable health information. This isn't ancestral information. This is not, really understanding your pedigree. This is information that is most powerful when provided through a clinician. So that way you have that additional clinical care and support every step of the way.
Yeah. If you can talk to me a little bit about, like we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but talking about precision medicine and once you start stacking the abilities of artificial intelligence on top of testing and genomes, and it's not just about, okay, you have these dormant, either genetic diseases or symptoms that might arise later, or symptoms or, a way to explain symptoms that you've already had, but then hopefully looking at the rest of your genetic makeup to decide on the cure basis, like what is going to be the perfect cure for you versus the next person, because you and the person next to you might have the same genetic disease, but the cures might be completely different for you versus that other person based on everything else you've got going on, right? Do you guys work in that space at all? Do you have any, what are your thoughts?
So the way that we utilize AI today is process improvement. So fun fact, there's only about 1,500 geneticists who are out there. There's 2,500 genetic counselors who are out there. So as we think about scaling the delivery of genetic information to broad populations, we absolutely have to figure out how to take that finite knowledge base that resides in the brilliant minds of these genetics experts and be able to scale that. So AI for us is really important in terms of how do you remove steps in the process so that way the geneticists can really be able to focus on the highest and most important part of the process where we need their minds. And then how do we take that knowledge base and be able to build it for scale to be able to help broader populations of people? As we think about a future of drug discovery and development, we work in an industry where there's an extremely high failure rate in terms of drug discovery. And so how can the various technologies that exist today ingest genetic information to be able to ensure that there's a higher hit rate? I think that's one of the most exciting areas in medicine today. It is something that is as of yet largely untapped. I know Eli Lilly and other large companies are really starting to dig into how do you deploy AI for really accelerating the target discovery and development side of things. But our database that we have is going to be extremely valuable in terms of informing that. So we've run more clinical exomes than anyone else in the space. So we have run at this point about 700,000 clinical exomes, all enriched for rare disease. So as we think about gene therapies, as we think about precision medicine for the rare disease space, our data asset is going to be central to ensuring that we can work in partnership with these drug developers to deliver on that promise.
So would it be fair to say that you would consider yourself to be more of like the picks and shovels of the health AI stack when it comes to at least this part of it?
Yeah, exactly. We'll be the data engine that fuels it all.
Cool. Well, that's not a bad place to be at. So you guys are a publicly traded company. You've been there for about 3 years. When did the company go public?
So we were actually acquired by a public company back in 2022. So I joined in 2021 with the goal of raising some capital, putting a growth strategy behind the company, and putting a scale strategy behind the company. And what we ended up doing was being acquired by a company that was called Semaphore. Semaphore was really interested in taking in building a large genetic data asset like the one that we just talked about, pairing it with information that you might find in your own EMR, and putting those two data assets together to be able to deliver on a more personalized approach to diagnosing disease. And so that was in 2022. In late 2021, the capital markets, of course, changed dramatically, and investors really started to attune to how do you get to profitability with the capital that you have on hand. So that was the mandate that was handed to me when I joined. And what we ended up doing was shutting down the company that acquired us in order to really preserve the way that we were deploying capital on the GeneDx business, which had the strongest the strongest competitive advantage and the most distinct competitive advantage in this space.
I'm sorry, you glossed over that way too quickly. No. So you got acquired by a company, and then you shut down the parent company.
Yes. The business lines that the parent company was running were in highly commoditized spaces. Where there was a ton of competition. And so they had been burning them.
You were the only other line of business?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So they had burned $90 million in that first quarter.
Wow.
I took over in Q2. And so it was a very difficult set of decisions that I and our team and our board had to make. But I think what we're seeing is that it's paying off now. And we decided to place a bet that the GeneDx business could provide a really valuable service that we happened to be leading at the time. 80% of clinical exomes run through us. So it's rare to have such a strong competitive advantage. Most companies are focused in reproductive health or in cancer diagnostics. And so we decided while everyone was deploying capital in those directions and solving those really important health problems, we were going to focus in the pediatric and rare disease space. And we've been able to deliver and execute. And I think that's what's reflected in the stock performance this year.
Wow. And so I have so many questions, but we'll focus on so talk to me a little bit about the differences. What are the dynamics in running a private company versus running a public company?
We've had to really transform the culture of the company. So GeneDx had been, as I mentioned, spun out of the NIH, so very academic in nature, which has paid off by way of having the strongest product that exists out there. And we will never sacrifice on the quality of our product, because accuracy is everything in this business. So how do you continue to have that same sort of rigor while also instilling these expectations that need to be met from a street perspective on a quarterly basis.
Right.
And so we've really had to, it's almost like starting to work out for the first time in a long time. It's like you've got to have the discipline and the commitment to really across every single team to understand what it is that you're trying to achieve, as basic as it sounds, have the clear plan and path to get there, and strong leadership. So we have instituted a way of working where every team knows what they need to deliver week by week, month by month, quarter by quarter. And we incentivize our teams to deliver on those plans. And so it is, it's a really important cultural shift from being private to being public. And I think what's really important for us as a company, because we have publicly said that we intend to be profitable in 2025. Why is that important? It's important because as a company who is we're a group of humans who are deeply passionate about diagnosing these diseases. Many of us have had some sort of familial experience that drives us.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you really merge the best patient care with driving towards profitability? Well, in earning that, you're able to continue to earn the right to invest in the business,
Mm-hmm.
and you're able to earn the right to invest in the best product that's out there, and removing friction from a healthcare system that is full of friction. How do we make it easier for families to have access to these products? So we have, I would say, culturally really shifted from, private and I would say curious about all of the different scientific angles that exist within the genetics industry, to being really focused with clear goals and just an unwavering commitment to excellence when it comes to patient care. And that is, I think, the biggest shift that we've had to make.
So, I mean, that all sounds great, but I'd have to imagine that comes at a cost. It comes at a cost also. I mean, you can't play around as much. Like it almost feels like you can't have a long-term vision, maybe isn't the right word, but you can't afford a longer horizon for that vision necessarily. If you have to consistently be proving every quarter, probably the way you're operating has to be much different. Like, would you do it again? Do you think that the value, because it sounds like you almost kind of like fell into it backwards, or at least from a lead, like being the company, like being the entire company. If you had to do it, if you had to make a move again, would you go public?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what going public forces you to do, as I said, the discipline associated with it is a really important discipline. I try to really liken it to like our P&L is like your own personal bank account.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're bringing a level of financial discipline to your personal finances, and companies need to do the same thing, which means, making some hard choices about what you're going to invest in now versus what you're going to invest in the future. You're not going to personally, at least most people are not personally in a place where they can afford to do absolutely everything they want to do at once. So where we were able to really focus is to say, we have the industry's leading clinical exome. And keep in mind, we were only getting paid 35% of the time for that test last year.
Wow.
So
Why?
We want to make
insurance?
So insurance companies.
Denying?
Yeah. Denial of claims. And some of it was how do we learn to do it better as a company?
Because you're in a bit of a unique, I don't know if it's unique, but like a tough spot, because the test is had. So your test is ordered, it's taken by the patient, then it goes to insurance, and insurance is able to deny it.
Correct.
Oh.
And it's the burden is on us to really understand, we have two customers, three. At the end of the day, ultimately, the patient is our customer,
Right.
always.
Right.
But the provider and the health systems are ordering tests, and then insurance companies are also our customers.
Right.
So the burden's on us to make sure that we have all the medical information that they require to ensure that the test doesn't get denied.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been able to improve that over the past year. So now
That's gotta be, by the way,
50% of the
that's gotta
time.
be a place that AI could probably bring significant value to people.
Totally.
For sure.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. That's exactly right. That's a fantastic use case for AI here. I think this year has been a really good example of focus on exome, focus on getting paid more. And what we started to see was the business was outperforming, and we were able to start making longer term bets.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to earlier this year say, we're going to invest in Epic Aura, so EMR integration, which
Mm-hmm.
makes it easier for a hospital, for a provider in a hospital to click a button and order a test.
Yep.
So that's a longer term investment that we can make to opening up access. Another one is we have a whole exome product and we have a whole genome product. We're starting to see not only guidelines say you should use a whole genome, but also for insurance companies and state by state Medicaid saying that they'll pay for a genome. So we want to make sure that we have the very best genome that's out there. So we started investing ahead of our plan in ensuring that we've got the best whole genome product that exists. So you're absolutely right. There's this balance of short term and how do you make sure you're not losing sight of the longer term horizon, and comes down to vision. Our vision is any genetic disease should be diagnosed as early as possible to prevent disease progression, no matter what age. So we continue to make decisions in the context of that mission and vision.
Amazing. Catherine, this is obviously a fascinating conversation. You have earnings call coming up when?
October 29th.
Okay, so coming up, what does going into 2025? I guess what is the last quarter and what is 2025 looking for you goals wise? What are you trying to accomplish?
So we want to continue to help as many of these families as possible, and today that means in the outpatient setting for kids who are symptomatic. So it's using our whole exome product. We're also starting, though, to really focus on the NICU. So 1 in 4 babies in the NICU actually have a genetic condition, yet only about 5% of them are getting tested. So we have a really big opportunity ahead of us in the NICU setting to be able to deploy a fast whole genome product. And so we're starting to ramp up our focus on that setting as well. So as we think about where we'll be a year from now, I'm really hopeful for our ability to start changing that statistic of the diagnostic odyssey being 6 to 8 years. I want to see us bring it down to as low as possible, because it's all information that we can deliver, as I said, within weeks, if not days.
That's awesome. Is there like a number of tests that you've done in 2023? 2024, or is that off the top of your head or no?
I'll encourage you to tune in on October 29th to hear the latest and greatest. Yeah.
The latest and greatest. All right. Sounds good. Well, Catherine, this has been absolutely fascinating. Best of luck in I guess the next little bit, and on the earnings call. Sounds like it should be fun and really fascinating. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.